Hi, everyone, and welcome to Pellegrino Walk. My name is Kevin Sisti. And once again, we're picking up this theme of theologies of the One New Man, Lou Engle's One New Man, Dean Briggs, Chris Berglund, and many others who kind of walk in the shadows behind them. And we've taken some detours along the way. We've had the 222 conference come in, and we've highlighted some different things with that and churches that actually turn. And then, of course, we've had the Valerie Evans story, which has been something we've paused on for a little bit to discuss the practical implications, the working out of the theologies into everyday life. How does it play out? What kind of damage is done from the theologies of this new order of the latter rain, or this revived latter rain that we're seeing today? So all of this comes into play now as we move forward. We move past these side trails and these roads. And where we want to pick up again is with the video Changing Gods, because that's where we kind of made a diversion. In fact, the original intent of that video was to go in a different direction so that we could continue on this path of the One New Man. At the time that I was making it, I felt the urgency that we needed to talk about Alice Bailey. So I changed the direction of the video to head towards the idea of this God that they're talking about, this militant God that wants to take over the world through us. Wow, that sounds a lot like Alice Bailey's God. So I made that case. But the original intent of the video was to go in a different direction, to talk about maybe some of the comments that we were receiving, where we look at the outrageousness of some of the theologies and some of the statements by the men that are kind of lurking in the shadows behind the guys with the megaphones, right? The Terry Bennetts, the Rachel Baxters, the Doug Barretts, who are saying things like, we become the Word made flesh, and hey, we're in the tribulation the first 3.5 years now, as Rachel Baxter would say. Or if we look at Terry Bennett, man, he's got the seals broken and everything. There's all kinds of outrageous claims there. So getting back to the comments, a lot of people commented like, how can anybody believe this? There were all kinds of comments like that. What I want to emphasize is if you haven't been in these movements, you don't understand the allure of the music. You don't understand the allure of the holding out of the carrot. And yes, you could be the tip of the arrow. And yes, we're going to present something using doublespeak or semantics on the front side that looks a lot different than the theologies that are wrapped around and growing out from underneath. As I've shown in this series, these theologies are heretical. And then the working out of those theologies into a practical Christian existence is different. It looks different because it is different, and it's based on a different God. Now, if you've watched the video Changing Gods, we started out the video with Communion America and David Bradshaw actually reading from the scripture. So we're going to start there today. And then we're going to switch, almost like there's a Y in the road. And instead of going towards Alice Bailey, which we did in that video, we're going to head off in a different direction and talk about a man named Terry Bennett, who of course has said seals are broken and making outrageous claims and all the things, right? But what we don't understand is that man who lurks in the shadows, well, his impact on the Christian church or the prayer movement. We're going to get into that a little bit. We're going to talk about Mike Bickle. We're going to talk about IHOPKC. And we're going to talk about how all this joins together into this big interconnected network that we see. There's so much from the 80s and the 90s that have pushed forward and threaded theologies through the movements that we're seeing right now. So we need to look at all that. And we're also going to talk about a man named Mark Dupont. And if those of you who have watched some of our videos remember that name, there's a reason why. He was part of the Toronto Blessing, and he made some comments in the past that we're going to have to revisit again. So if there's one thing that you could be thinking throughout this whole video and put it in the back of your head, it is the fact that this stuff that they say, the outrageous claims, the seals being broken, we're the Word made flesh, we're manifest sons, we're the tip of the arrow, we're an elite group, we're Joel's, all the outrageous things, we're deified, we're in a Melchizedek order with Jesus, and we're one, we're in fullness with all of those things. As you think about that and you go, how could people believe this? You've got to understand how they're presenting it on the front side. So have that in the back of your head as you're seeing all this, and especially as Christians. We have to have compassion for the ones that are in these movements, who have been duped and directed into these movements from elsewhere, brought in to deceive on purpose or deceived because the people are deceived that are bringing them in. And frankly, this is why Barb and I make these videos, because we understand and we've been inside. We understand the doublespeak. We understand the semantics that these men are using, men and women, are using to draw people in to their movement. So once again, let's start it with David Bradshaw, only go in a different direction this time.
Over our nation's capital, over this generation, over Gen Z, Gen Alpha, all generations. We just lift our eyes up. The Son is the image of the invisible God. The firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created. Things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he, Jesus Christ, the Messiah, he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything, everybody say that, so that in everything he might have supremacy. For God was pleased to have his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. And so tonight we say, Jesus, have supremacy in all things. In all things, be exalted. Come on, let's lift our voices.
So this is the front side, what they want you to hear. But we've been highlighting the stuff that's beneath the surface. We're going to keep bringing that up. As I said in the beginning of this series, we were going to turn over every rock. And I'm not going to stop doing that. And along the way, if you ever feel like, how can these people believe this? Folks, this is threaded through global missions, the spirit-empowered movement, it is so, so big. And it extends into places that, are frankly all over the globe. And so looking at these men like Terry Bennett, who we're going to highlight in a few seconds, and you go, man, this is so false. We have to understand the double meaning behind it. We have to understand that there's a production on the front side that's far different from the stuff you're hearing from under the surface. So I want to dig back into Terry Bennett. And I want you to pause for a second, because the immediate thought is going to be, well, we've already seen. We know that he's false. I want to establish something a little bit different. Though I know he's false, I want to look at this man that's operated in the shadows and the influence that he's had on people who do have the megaphone. Here's an interview with Jed Hartley. You'll remember Jed Hartley, his father, Bob Hartley, who has a very significant history with IHOPKC, not a very good one, as well as Bethel Church, the whole Sean Bowles thing blowing up recently, and Bob Hartley having his hand in all of that relating to Bethel. So this is an interview with Jed Hartley about a year ago on Leaving the Message with John Collins.
There was this huge prophecy that Terry Bennett gave to Mike Bickle, which I don't know if you know who Terry Bennett is. He's really not a big figure in the IHOPKC world. A lot of times Mike would latch on to some of these like smaller prophets. So prophets would come in, travel, and give a prophetic word. And it was kind of up to Mike's discretion whether or not he would take it. I don't think that Mike gave many grand prophecies after like the 80s, 90s. Like once IHOP began, Mike wasn't really actively involved in giving some of these larger prophecies. He was mainly kind of a leader figure who would then bring in others to give prophetic words, whether that's Chris Reed, whether that was Terry Bennett. So anyway, Terry Bennett comes in and they have this meeting, and it's never really spoken of from the pulpit at IHOP in full detail. It's just talked about, hey, there's going to be, in the next 5 years, there's going to be these big trials and tribulations, and that there's going to be this great shaking. And for me, it sort of signified, we've been talking about the end of times. We've been talking about the tribulation. It's going to happen. Like next 5-10 years, there was always this sort of, we don't know when it's going to happen. We know it's going to happen in the generation, but no one knows the date or the hour. But this was sort of the signifier where it was like, okay, now it's right around the corner. And I remember kind of being half in and half out. Half of me was like, yeah, okay, this makes sense that things are starting to reach a fever pitch. This is the time in which the Lord is going to return. And then half of me was already starting to be like, I think that this is kind of not true. I think that kind of all of this is not true. And I was 18, right on that sort of beginning to ask questions myself. And immediately after this, I went to YWAM and did some missions work and stuff. But in my head, this was sort of like a very important moment. And I remember getting a hold of the specific Terry Bennett prophecy. And it's not general. It's very, very specific. He talks about the angel Gabriel came to him and gave him this message.
Isn't that interesting? So Terry Bennett, this is back in 2010, and he's once again talking about the angel Gabriel coming to visit him. It seems like the angel Gabriel has visited Terry Bennett often, more so than even what was described in the pages of the Bible. And that was to different individuals. So very, very interesting as this comes up again, in this interview with Jed Hartley.
2001, and now he was saying that it was going to begin in this season. The dates were like very specific. It was going to be 2015 was when it was supposed to culminate. There were going to be solar flares that shut down 90% of all communications. There was going to be earthquakes that were going to hit the East Coast, not the West Coast, that were going to destroy, half of America. This is just verbatim. I continued to see effects. The sun did a weird thing. It was like a solar flare. The magnetism of the earth was increased. The tilt of the earth was altered so that time itself changed all over the earth. And then I continued to see the effects of that was the satellites were both blinded and some of them were yanked out right of the sky. God blinded the communications of the earth, cell phones, all types of things, military hardware, commercial hardware. People were blinded. GPS was useless. The magnetic north itself altered, which affected all forms of travel, especially by sea and by land. So, and it keeps going. And I bring this all up to be like, this was what was being said. And now, if you find the ways that Terry Bennett or others, or Mike even talks about this message, there is zero accountability for this prophetic word. Like absolute 2015 came and went. None of these things obviously happened. The earth didn't tilt, right? The time has not been fundamentally altered on earth. There was not a solar flare that blinded all of military and commercial hardware. These were all very specific promises. These were things that I believed or half believed. Like I half believed they were true, and then half was like, I don't know, this is pretty crazy. And there's just zero accountability for the fact that this was the prophecy that was being spread, and it was kind of done in a very secretive way amongst IHOP. Like it was talked very generally from the stage. It was very, we think that these things are going to happen. We have this, Gabriel came, and I don't even know if he from the stage ever talked about the angel Gabriel in this, but this was sort of the motivation behind a lot of the prophecy that was happening in 2010. And behind the scenes, everybody was kind of talking about this, and this was the specific details that were given. And it's just so false and so shallow, so completely devoid of any truth, any reason, and it's just fodder to scare and control individuals.
To scare and control individuals. And man, what kind of damage do you think false prophecy does to individuals? We have so many that are still at IHOPKC, still in other movements like Bethel and Morningstar. We're trying to pull out, but they're holding on to prophecies. For example, IHOPKC, they're holding on to the prophetic promises to Mike Bickle, which again come from Bob Jones, come from Paul Cain, bad roots, straight out of the latter rain, just absolutely, completely false. Yet they've bought into the narrative. They've moved their families from other countries to this country, from other states to Kansas City, and therefore bought the narrative completely and are in, and they're not going anywhere. So eventually, when they dig out of this, or their kids dig out of it because they have been in this cultic-like authoritarian, we're going to speak prophecy into you environment for so long, then they have to strip this off. And when they do that and they deconstruct all that stuff, a lot of times the Jesus of the Bible goes with it. This is the sort of thing that we want to prevent. This is why we're trying to pull people out and trying to tell them, come out of her. Come out of this system that's just not Jesus. It's a complete false system. So we see here Jed Hartley, who my heart goes out to him, because here's a young guy that bought into this, but then as he's starting to get a little bit older, he's understanding, hey, maybe this is just not true. And one would come to that understanding if all these things that Terry Bennett actually predicted would happen to Mike Bickle actually did happen. So I actually do have a copy of the Terry Bennett Word from 2010, and it's 20 pages long, so we're not going to get into it. There's a couple things that I want to bring to your attention. The whole word starts out, and this is all done in a boardroom, by the way, at IHOPKC, where it's transcribed. And then, interestingly enough, Alan Hood is part of this meeting as well. So wondering, where Alan Hood stands on all of this. Certainly he has come out and said that he is for the advocates with all the abuse, has repented, all the things. But Barb and I have met Alan Hood at an FTT event. I really would like to know where Alan Hood is theologically on this stuff. Whether he still buys into this and the whole manifest sonship and presence and all of those things. I'm glad that he's repentant over the women that have been abused. But what are you doing now, Alan? Where are you at now? Where do you stand theologically on things like manifest sonship, which can be the most evil doctrine of our day? But the setting has Mike Bickle and Terry Bennett and Alan Hood as part of the conversation. And it starts out with a word that Terry Bennett was giving Mike Bickle in 2010 about South Korea and a meeting with, I believe, the head of South Korea at that time. So he goes into detail on that. I'm not going to do that, but I am going to move down to some points that Terry Bennett actually brought up. And these points are exactly what Jed Hartley was talking about. Again, great and grandiose things happening in the world that you can see. There's about 19 points that, frankly, there's some general things in there that might have happened, but generally did not occur. And funny thing is, Jed Hartley was talking about solar flares and the axis of the Earth. And then, of course, one of the last things that Terry Bennett had mentioned is a plume cloud covering half the nation, which, of course, didn't happen as well. All these grandiose claims by Terry Bennett, and we'll try to put this link in the description so that you can download this. You can read it yourselves if you actually have the time to do that. I read about half of it, and I was pretty much done after that. So it looks like Terry Bennett had a pretty significant influence on Mike Bickle in 2010. So much so that a new urgency came about. Even when Barb and I were there, I remember hearing Mike Bickle talk about the possibility of a limited nuclear war on the East Coast. And interesting now to find out that that actually came from the false prophet Terry Bennett. But what kind of effect would that have on IHOPKC, or what kind of effect would that have on the world? Well, let's look a little bit at IHOP's influence on the global scene. The International House of Prayer in Kansas City is credited with birthing a global 24/7 prayer movement that has influenced thousands of locations worldwide. So let's look at the global 24/7 prayer rooms all over the world. IHOPKC and what Mike Bickle did served as a blueprint for thousands of these day and night prayer rooms established all over the world. And even in Jerusalem, there are so many prayer rooms. Or how about the global prayer movement itself through the Global Prayer Room webcast, which is on YouTube, and there's still numbers of people that watch this, and the prayer room as a whole. IHOPKC has connected tens of thousands of intercessors worldwide in a single continuous prayer chain. This is why the current leaders don't want to shut it down. They believe in this whole movement, even though the roots go right back to the heretical latter rain. And these are just a couple of the ways which IHOP has influenced the world. And Terry Bennett's little word, 20-page word that he gave to Mike Bickle, had an influence on where IHOP was going, their direction, and the things that they were actually speaking, though not out in the open mentioning Terry Bennett's name, yet taking a lot of his words, his prophecies, and making those evident in the things that they were saying in their sermons and their teachings. Or how about the Awakening House of Prayer, now in 50 nations? They all trace their spiritual lineage to the IHOPKC model. Folks, Mike Bickle and IHOPKC have created a system or a blueprint which has now been spread all over the world, even though this man was clearly in sin, 17 cases of abuse over his 40-year ministry. Even through all of that, the impact of this man and his movement is all over the world. It's threaded through global missions. It's threaded through missions organizations like YWAM and all the others that are out there. IHOPKC has literally affected the global church. And this man, Terry Bennett, has been speaking into Mike Bickle in 2010. But yet, that's not all of it. That's not the complete story. It seems like Terry Bennett had a much bigger influence on Mike Bickle. We're going to be getting into that, but on the former videos, we have established that Terry Bennett said the first seal to the fifth seal were broken. We showed you videos where he spoke that the first seal and the second seal was broken. We're going to get into now the third through the fifth, but hang with me till the end because you're going to see the extent of Terry Bennett's influence on both Mike Bickle and IHOPKC and their global movement.
Just to let you know, it's been released in heaven, so I can release it now publicly on the 11th, which is where, in our time frame, Yom Kippur began, and then went into the 12th of this month. The Lord broke the third seal on the 11th. As you know, when you look at Revelation chapter 6, the third seal involves famine, and that famine will result in a very significant shortages, particularly is qualified here in the scriptures, grain, and thus very high prices, a day's wages for a quart. It says of wheat, 3 quarts of barley for a day's wages. So that's specific to famine, and specifically spoken of as in the arena of grains, the third seal. That was on the 11th. On the 12th, he broke the fourth seal of death. Again, I will speak more specifically about this next Sunday. I'm just honestly just releasing what's been released in heaven. These things, you know, God breaks the seals. The Son of God, who alone can, breaks the seal and releases the horses. And so it's a release. It's a beginning.
Okay, we're going to stop it right there because, frankly, I have heard enough of that, and I'm sure you have too. But once again, Terry Bennett can release this to all of us because it's been released in heaven. This is so like the Manifest Sonship teachers, right? They're the elite. They're the ones that are making visits to heaven so that they can tell us profane, us Mephibosheths, the lame ones, what's actually going on. These are the high ups. Even though Jesus said the greatest among you will be your servant. I find it amazing. So we're going to go right from that. Obviously, he's saying that the third and fourth seals were broken. Of course, he's talking about the black and the pale horses. And now he's going to move to the fifth seal.
So on October the 2nd, I know I've shared this with a few people, and it went out, but I wanted to speak specifically about the fifth seal this morning, and I was allowed to see the fifth seal broken on October the 2nd, and so, but I don't want to just simply say, okay, I find a struggle within my own heart in this.
Okay, and we can leave it with that. Terry Bennett struggling inside his heart. I wish that he would struggle with the fact that this is just so utterly, completely false. And folks, as I've said before, I don't doubt the spiritual powers behind this. Like Barb often says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but principalities and powers. So we understand that there's spiritual forces that we can't see, nor do we understand, that are behind a lot of these things. So is Chris Berglund really getting the dreams? Is Terry Bennett really seeing angels, not the angel Gabriel, but an angel of light? And I can't discount any of those things, but I can tell you that he's false. I can examine the fruit of what the man is actually saying and his theological beliefs based on the Word of God, based on what Jesus said would happen in the last days, that there would be false Christs coming at us from left and right. And this is certainly a perfect example of that. So Terry Bennett, once again, way out there, way outrageous. Third through fifth seals are broken. Rachel Baxter in the last video saying, I believe it, and I'm holding to it, and the tribulation has begun. We're in the first 3.5 years, and we're going to be moving into the second 3.5 years, kind of towards the middle of this year. This is what she's been saying all along, but now starting to back off a little bit. Now, all of a sudden, as it's getting a little bit closer, well, the sixth seal isn't as easy for these guys, right? Once the sixth seal is broken, I think the whole world is going to know it. So all of a sudden backing off on the timeline a little bit, because that sixth seal has to be broken to get into the seventh, which is the beginning of the trumpets. And that's the beginning of the last 3.5 years, which is the Great Tribulation, which is what many have believed throughout the years. So, what is the sixth seal? Why are they backing off on that? Why hasn't Terry Bennett, you've got the first 5 seals broken, which of course is a stretch because we're still doing the same things that we've done every day, right? We still have satellites in the air, and we still have life going on as usual. So let's look at what the sixth seal is, because I think we could find out why Terry Bennett may not want to jump into that one yet. Revelation 6:12. I looked when he opened the sixth seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake. The sun had become as black as sackcloth of hair. That would be hard to fake. The moon became like blood. Stars of heaven fell to the earth as a fig tree drops its late figs when it's shaken by a mighty wind. Then the sky receded as a scroll when it's rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved out of its place. And the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the commanders, the mighty men, every slave and every free man, hid themselves in the caves and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. I don't think we're going to see Terry Bennett mention the sixth seal being broken very soon. That's kind of my take. I think we're going to see people like Rachel Baxter continue to back off on their timeline from 2022 to 2029, something that was so sure to her at one time, but now all of a sudden, well, yeah, we're gonna back off of that a little bit. The problem is these folks have been talking about this timeline for a long time, and something's supposed to happen towards the middle of 2026. Are they going to manufacture that? It would seem pretty hard to do, but, like Charles Taze Russell, the predecessor of the Jehovah's Witnesses, or like the Jehovah's Witnesses that came after him, well, they said the presence did show up. It's just in and through. So what are these folks going to do? And that's the real question. And that's why we watch and wait. So as promised, we're going to talk about the influence that Terry Bennett actually had on Mike Bickle and IHOPKC much, much earlier. In fact, even before IHOPKC was even started. And we had to dig back pretty deep for this one. So on this video, Mike Bickle is talking about the prophetic history of IHOPKC. And he goes into great length. He starts in 1988, and he talks about a transition time that was prophesied by Rick Joyner, by meeting Benny Hinn, and also by a man named Mark Dupont from the Toronto Vineyard. They all spoke of a transition time that Mike Bickle was going to be in, that was going to take him from his current church and into the whole IHOP scene, which, again, transition time, so he didn't even know what IHOP was at that time. But he was moving into it, all because of these prophecies of people that, of course, I would consider to be false teachers. Well, once again, I want to emphasize Mark Dupont, because if those of you who are watching now had watched some of the videos that we've done from Trisha Tillen's article called The New Thing, you'll know this man, Mark Dupont. And here's why. Reading from another Trisha Tillen article called Beyond Toronto, Mark Dupont of the Toronto Vineyard writes that he sees Toronto as one of the major well springs for world revival. He claims to have received a significant prophecy in May 1992 and June 1993 of a mighty wave starting in Toronto and flowing powerfully out eastward across Canada. He likens the present renewal to the John the Baptist ministry, heralding the coming of Christ, and believes that it will lead to a major revival in the Western nations between the years of 2000 and 2005. Then he makes this intriguing statement. This move of the Spirit, referring to the Toronto blessing, in 1994 is not just a charismatic and Pentecostal experience concerning power or gifting. And this is the key sentence. It's one thing to be clothed with power. It's another to be indwelt with the person of God. And isn't that what we're dealing with today? They're talking about the person of God coming and dwelling in us. Even though we've already had the Pentecost, we have the Spirit of God living inside of us. This is something different. Trisha Tillen says the first Pentecost caused believers to be clothed with power on high. The second Pentecost is about the incarnation of Christ into his body. To spiritualize the scriptures, as all latter-rain teachers do, it's about the return of the ark to the temple, the coming of Christ invisibly, just like the Jehovah's Witnesses, into his living temple, the church. This takes place according to the doctrine at the Feast of Tabernacles, which celebrates the Lord dwelling with his people. He will indwell us personally. When this happens, no longer will it be the head, Jesus Christ in heaven, and the body, believers on earth, but one perfect man filling both heaven and earth. This is what the latter rain teachers said we must expect in the final outpouring of the church age. The one perfect man, the one new man, according to Lou Engle. But isn't it interesting that Mike Bickle is prophesied over by Mark Dupont? Can you see the roots of this stuff? So I said all that to lead up to the video. So now Mike Bickle is talking about during the 2 years of transition, a really strong 2 years of fasting and praying during this time of transition, which is kind of 1996 to 98, something like that. So he's talking about fasting and then periods of fasting where he goes from Sunday to Wednesday every week for about 2 years. And then he breaks the fast on Wednesday by spending that morning in prayer. Then he talks about the fast ending on Wednesdays. And then on a certain Wednesday, during those couple years, he ended up getting passed a note from someone. And this is where we'll pick up the story.
And these two encounters, both in September 1997, these two encounters are so powerful to me. It's Wednesday morning, because I would always break my fast Wednesday about in the afternoon. I'd start Sunday afternoon to Wednesday afternoon. So Wednesday morning, I'm the weirdest physically. You're just kind of like that, but you're all buzzy with God and you're whatever. So I love the Wednesday morning prayer meetings. Plus, I was going to have lunch at noon, so it was always kind of fun. And I would go there from 6 to noon every Wednesday, just for 6 hours, and sit in the prayer room that we had at our church. And so I'm there for the 6-hour period, about 6 hours, and this September 3rd, and I have this unusual experience. These 3 verses, I have them written here. Revelation 2:17, Revelation 3:12, and Revelation 19:12. These are massive, and I'm doing this rapid fire. This is a massive reality here. And so we got to unpack this later, because this is too important to rush by. But I just want it in our storyline. So I'm there, and I'm sitting there for for nearly a 6-hour period, which I do most every Wednesdays for those 2 years, and to end my fast. And I was looking at these 3 verses. I could not get away from them. And I felt the wind and the fire of the Lord. I felt wind, so much so, not blowing my paper away, but I looked at the vents. And I said, are the air conditioners on? No, because it's September. It's not hot in the room. And the heat certainly is not on. I checked everywhere because I feel a wind hitting me. And I'm going, Because I always check that kind of stuff out. Because, again, I don't want to go on a joyride that's stupid. I want it to be real. I go, okay. Like somebody's in a prayer meeting and they feel water. I go, a pipe broke in the ceiling. Just chill out, okay? Not always, but check the pipes first before you go on the internet and tell the story. But anyway, there's no wind there. And I'm feeling wind burning up and down me. Again, I've had that maybe 7 or 8 times in 40 years. I've told you all of them in these histories. And it's very intense. I mean, burning fire, and it's these 3 verses. And I'm reading them. I'm weeping before the Lord. I'm just saying them back to the Lord. The way a verse touches you, say it back to the Lord with gratitude and affection. Say, Lord, thank you. Show me more. Lord, this is where I want to talk to you. Get these verses, whichever verses he's talking to you, into your language in your prayer life with God, and those verses will grow in you. Don't just underline them, tell your friend, and move on. Throw in a little fasting and prayer and say them to God regularly, and they'll grow in you. And that's something I've understood over the years, so I'm doing this. And I'm being so touched. I'm loving it. I'm over in a corner. I just don't even want it to end. It's so different, powerful. And so somebody comes and gives me a note from a guy named Terry Bennett. I don't know Terry Bennett.
This is about 96, 97, 98. Not sure about the exact dates. I think he I think he said actually September of 97. So this dates back to pre-IHOP. This is Mike Bickle's transition time from his current church that he was pastoring to IHOPKC, to this movement that was going to touch the world. And he's handed a note from somebody, and the note is from Terry Bennett, the man who's prophesying that Gabriel came to him and broke the seals. Well, isn't that interesting?
Moved to Kansas City. Someone said he's a prophetic guy. I go, well, I'll meet him someday, But I'm so gripped in my transition stuff. I didn't want to meet new people, new prophet guys. I'm in a flow with God. I was really content about that, where I was going. And he'd been there maybe a month or two, I don't know, and I hadn't met him. And he gave someone a note, and they tapped me on the shoulder, and the note says, I saw an angel pouring a bowl or something of fire on you. And he was flapping his wings, and wind was all around you. I'm reading the note. Okay, I'm looking around. I'm in a corner. Nobody knows what verses I'm reading, and he's way on the other side. He's not even in the room. He said, and the Lord told me he was speaking to you from Revelation 2:17, 3:12, and 19:12. He's going to meet you in those three verses, the very three verses.
Now, once again, folks, I think that we need to have some understanding, too, of IHOPKC and Mike Bickle. I firmly believe that these prophetic words, and even from evidence that we've seen, right, they've been manipulated over time. They've been embellished into stories that are more grandiose than what actually happened. So do I believe that those were the exact verses that Terry Bennett gave him, and even the extent of the story? No, I think that these words and prophecies were changed over the years to fit the narrative that they needed it to fit. But still, nonetheless, we have Terry Bennett right in the middle of the fray here.
I mean, when somebody gives you the very three verses that you're being touched in an unusual, I said, who is this guy? They go, well, he left. You can meet him some other day. I went, unbelievable. I was so moved. I didn't even go on about and give the testimony. I just went, these are three really important truths. You don't have to use that verse. But again, what I do on Friday night is anchored in those three verses. In all these 20 years, it's these three verses that have got a hold of my heart. It's called intimacy with God. And I said, I'm going to go deep in this. And I don't know how deep I've gone, but I want to go deeper in the next 20 years, yay more.
Once again, let me stop it here and tell you the significance. So this is Mike Bickle's message, intimacy with God, the Song of Solomon, affection-based obedience. It's all the beauty of God. It's his life. It's what he believed God was calling him to. And the majority of what he spoke, he was talking about intimacy with God all the time, even though he was abusing all these women. But this was his message that was supposedly from God. But yet we find that Terry Bennett had something to do with it. The false prophet, Terry Bennett.
And so I am so touched. Okay, now it's 2 weeks later. It's Wednesday again. I love the Wednesdays because lunch was in just a few minutes. 6 hours I'd sit there. It was. I called it spiritual romance because my heart was tender. I felt the love of God, and which again, you don't always feel while you're fasting, but it's afterwards. But I guess the collective number of them, I don't know how it all works, but I just had this tenderness almost always on Wednesdays. It was unusual. So now it's September 17th. It's 2 weeks later on Wednesday. And I'm sitting there. The in-between Wednesday, nothing happened, which I didn't expect any great thing to happen. That was a one-off thing when I had the wind and the fire. So here now, it's the second. It's 2 weeks later. And I'm reading Isaiah 63. I don't really know Isaiah 63. I mean, who reads Isaiah 63? Come on, let's be honest. I don't even hardly know what it's about. And I'm reading it. And just for those that don't know it, a lot of you around here, we're familiar with it because we've shared it and others have shared it a number of times over the last 20 years. But here again, it's strange. The fire and the wind is there again. I look up to make sure a vent's not open. And I go, this is real. I mean, for hours. I don't mean for 10 minutes. Like the Wednesday before, for hours. And it's hitting again. It's Isaiah 63. I spend the whole near 6 hours on this passage. Most of the entire morning. And I'm reading it. And it says, Isaiah asked the question. I'll be just super fast on this. Who is this man coming up from Edom? And we know that ancient Edom is modern day Jordan. He's on his way to Jerusalem, walking through Jordan on the way to Jerusalem. And in the end times biblical storyline, the nations of the world, under the leadership of the Antichrist, have surrounded Jerusalem. And Jesus, his second coming, he's come in glory. He's touched base on the ground, and he's marching up to Jerusalem. He's going to touch the Mount of Olives, the whole thing. But he's marching up to Jerusalem. And Isaiah, 700 years before Jesus' ministry, 2,700 years ago, he sees the Messiah in the end times marching up to Jerusalem, coming through Edom, which is modern-day Jordan, which is next door to Jerusalem, as you know. And then he's got this question. Who is this guy? His garments are dyed red. He's coming up through Basra. That's the capital of Edom. That's just some miles away from Jerusalem. And then the man, the Messiah, answers back to Isaiah. Just shocks Isaiah, I'm sure. I know he says, who is this guy? Isaiah continues. He's glorious in his garments. His apparel, his clothing is supernatural. And he's traveling. He's marching up to Jerusalem, releasing the power of God, which we know from the biblical record. He's releasing the 7 bowls of wrath in Revelation chapter 16. He's releasing the power of God on the Antichrist army, and he's about to completely annihilate the Antichrist army. He's marching up to Jerusalem as the greater David. He's coming up to deliver the nation. And so now, this messianic figure that Isaiah doesn't know what's going on, he says, it's me. It's I. I'm speaking in righteousness. What I'm going to tell you in a minute is rooted in righteousness. It's not rooted in anything wrong. It's rooted in what's right, because he's going to talk about his judgments. Because his judgments are the most criticized, rejected, accused thing in the body. Even by the body of Christ, they accuse God's judgments. But Jesus says it's righteousness that I'm speaking. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to say in a minute, but I want you to know it's rooted in righteousness. And I'm mighty to save. I'm going to show my power and set my people completely free that are surrounded around Jerusalem, the Jewish people. So Isaiah says, why are your clothing, why are they red? It's like you've been treading in a wine press. And most of you know a wine press. Like, just say it was something this size. They're all different sizes. And they had wood ones and stone ones. They put all the grapes in. Then a bunch of people would stomp on them. They'd be about 4 feet high. And the juice would run out of the wine press. They'd make wine. But you had to stomp it. Or they had a big rock stone that rolled on their juices to squash them, to crush them. So the juice ran out. And it says, he goes, it looks like you're trampling a wine press. You got these beautiful supernatural garments, but they're all red, like grape juice is on you. And he goes, well, verse 3, I'll tell you. I have trodden the winepress. And what he means is I'm going to destroy all the Antichrist armies, and their blood is actually going to get on me. And John the Apostle in Revelation 19 referenced this. That when Jesus comes up to Jerusalem, the blood of his enemies is on him. And he says, I trod it. Here's the key phrase, alone. He goes, no one. And what he means, no one was with me. He didn't mean believers did not agree with him. He meant there was no national government that would employ their army to stand with him against the Antichrist. All of the armies of the earth are with the Antichrist against Jesus. He goes, I couldn't get any army, any national government to agree with me. And I'm trampling the Antichrist, and their blood's on my garments. I've stained my robes. And he says it 3 or 4 times. Again, no one would uphold me. And he goes on and on. You can read the whole passage. I think 4 times in the passage, I'm alone. Nobody would do this. And so, by the way, when Jesus marches up to Jerusalem, the blood is on his garments because he's not ashamed of the blood. It's a trophy to him. He's saying, I'm up close and personal. I delivered my people. I didn't delegate it. I did it. With my own hands, I was up close and personal. I'm not ashamed of the blood of the enemies of God on my garments. The body of Christ, many are ashamed of God's judgments, but he is not ashamed of them. He calls them righteous. And so this is becoming clear. I'm almost 6 hours, the whole 6:30 to noon time there. And I'm saying to the Lord whispers, I feel it real clear. He goes, will you stand with me? I'm not a national government, but as a believer, would you agree with me? Because this is very unpopular. And I was just weeping before the Lord. And I said, Lord, I will stand with you. And the Lord speaks clearly. He goes, you will find rejection. You will find an attack. You will find stigma even among your own people in the body of Christ if you stand with me in this part of my end time plan. Because I'm not just a bridegroom king, which is Isaiah 62. I'm also a judge, Isaiah 63. It's one passage. Because Isaiah 63 goes with the Hephzibah in chapter 62. It's one passage. There's no contradiction. Will you stand with me? I didn't talk about God's judgments. I mean, every now and then I said, God's going to judge, and I moved on. You know, I gave it 30 seconds every now and a couple times a year. But I never thought about his judgments. He goes, would you do this? Now, I'm really into Song of Solomon. I have been now for some years at this time. And in Song of Solomon, chapter 5, verse 10, Jesus is beautiful, and he presents himself in dazzling garments that are white. Dazzling, beautiful, chief among 10,000. And I'm saying, Lord, I love the Jesus in white. And he puts in my heart, will you stand for the Jesus in red? Because there's no contradiction. The Jesus of Christmas, peace and goodwill, is the true Jesus, and the Jesus of Armageddon is the same Jesus. There's no contradiction, because it's Armageddon's going to lead to peace and goodwill of all men. There's no contradiction. And I said, yes. He goes, you will be ostracized. You will be attacked, even by the body of Christ. You will bear a stigma. On and on. I said, Lord, I don't care. I'll do this. I'll do this. And now it's 12 o'clock, and I am just so wasted. My strength is so, I love it. I'm just, yes. Now, my eyes are closed. The guy taps me on the shoulder. Well, it's 12 o'clock, so I get to eat in a minute anyway, so I'm not that bummed out. But I go, yes. And here's Terry Bennett. I don't know him yet. He goes, hi. He goes, I'm not going to do this every time I come to a prayer meeting. 2 weeks ago, I gave you a note. I go, yeah, I appreciated it. He goes, well, I know it was true. You never told me if it was true. I hadn't got back to him. And he said, I got another one. He goes, and I'm not going to do this all the time. He says, the same angel. He's pouring wind and fire on you. You got wind and fire on you, just like 2 weeks ago. I'm staring at him. Absolutely true. I don't say nothing. He says, the last time he gave you Revelation 2:17, Revelation 3:12, and Revelation 19:12. He goes, here, he says, he's going to put a mantle. I saw him of Isaiah 63 on you. My Bible's closed now because I looked at my Bible. He goes, he wants you to know the Jesus in red. And he says, will you proclaim the Jesus in red? Because he's going to help you to do that along with the rest of the message. And then he left. Just 60 seconds later, he goes, I don't want to bother you. And I just bowed down and said, Lord, I really want the Jesus in white, the dazzling Jesus of Song of Solomon 5:10. But I want the Jesus of red. I don't want to pick which Jesus. He's one man in his glory.
Well, there you have it. Terry Bennett had a tremendous impact on Mike Bickle. So at a time when you have C. Peter Wagner from Fuller organizing a number of organizations to basically create the New Apostolic Reformation, when you have John Wimber embracing some of this in the early 90s, and the idea of dominion and takeover and all that, all of a sudden, Mike Bickle is going to embrace the Jesus in red. This is far different than taking dominion ourselves and the in and through us Jesus that's going to come back, right? Where we take dominion ourselves. We're the ones marching. We're the ones with the blood on us because we're wielding the sword. No, this is far different. I believe this is a moment in time where Mike Bickle's theology changed a bit, and which caused him to move forward as a premillennial dominionist, which is really different, but it's one that embraces the fact that we are going to, as Christians, embrace societal change, transformation, and marketplace, all of the things, while at the same time believing that the world is going to get worse. So the church is going to rise up in victory while the world is getting worse, and Jesus is going to come back at the end and slay the enemies himself. Far different theology. One of the amazing things is we had talked with Dean Briggs way back when we were intercessors for him. And he had talked about his theology being so far different from Mike Bickle's that he couldn't even bring it up in a staff meeting because, or teach it for that matter at IHOPU, because basically Dean Briggs was a hardcore dominionist that believed that Jesus was coming in and through us and we were going to wield the sword, whereas Mike Bickle believed something far different. Well, turns out Terry Bennett had a lot to do with that by confirming that with Mike Bickle back in 1997. And so the threads of this and the foundations and roots of all this are amazing when we really look into it. But here's the one thing that I really want to emphasize at the end of this video. As we've looked at the outrageousness of Terry Bennett standing there and saying the seals were broken, as we look at his friend Douglas Barrett saying, "We are the Word made flesh," and we understand that this is just absolutely non-Christian, and it's all right in front of us, and we're going, how can people believe this, right? Look at the impact Terry Bennett had on Mike Bickle, and then look at the impact that Mike Bickle and IHOPKC, which hadn't even started at this time, but look at the impact they were going to make on the world. Here's just a few examples. We've already talked about the global 24/7 prayer room. So we've talked about the global prayer movement, which is all over the world. We've talked about awakening prayer hubs. But what about a partnership with YWAM, which is right there in Kansas City, right? An intercession and missions partnership, which was birthed to raise like 100 million intercessors for global missions. Or what about the Global Bridegroom Fast, which was monthly at IHOPKC, but an annual corporate fasting and prayer initiative practiced by believers all over the world? What about justice initiatives by IHOPKC to birth prayer for justice movements, including like the silent prayer siege at the U.S. Supreme Court and movements all over the world to end human trafficking and, of course, abortion in our own country? Well, that's a lot of influence. And Terry Bennett, before any of this happened, spoke in to Mike Bickle. How about the IHOP conferences? What about the One Thing event, which drew huge crowds, such as in 2010 alone, brought in 27,000 young people from across 50 countries, all to Kansas City, who then dispersed. And this was an every year occurrence. How about training and education? The International House of Prayer, IHOPU, related internships have trained thousands to go across the world. Or their influence on music and musicians, which they raised up to go all over the world. Mike Bickle and IHOPKC have had a global reach, and it was birthed out of the latter rain. It was birthed from Bob Jones, Paul Cain, who spoke into Mike Bickle as well, who helped him form a theology of manifest sons of God. All of these threads are all over the world, and Terry Bennett spoke into this man. So next time you see some of the outrageousness that we present, and you think, how could people believe this stuff? Well, again, it's semantics, right? They're saying different things on the surface. Their words have double meanings. They have fulfilled the prophecies of Alice Bailey. They really have. They're speaking things that we normally look at and go, yeah, I'm used to that. They must mean this, but they mean something different. If I had to sum up where we've been in this video and a thesis that I want you to understand from the end, that is, not everything that you see on the surface is the way that it seems. Please don't push any of these men off as crazy, outrageous, or so far on the fringe that no one would believe them. The fact is that they're doing exactly what Alice Bailey said should be done to infiltrate the church. They're using doublespeak, they're using semantics, and they don't say everything out in the open. Whether they're deceived and deceiving, or whether they know exactly what they're doing. In the end, it really doesn't matter, because it's happening. And it's happening right in front of our faces as the magicians of the NAR, of the Spirit-empowered movement, of the new revived latter rain in our day, have, through sleight of hand, had you concentrating on words that you do understand, while meaning something far different and slipping in a new God right underneath your nose as you look at the buildings and you look at the promotions and everything else. Welcome to 2026. Welcome to the new paradigm that they're presenting. Oh, Church of God, it's time to wake up. Thank you for watching today. God bless you.